like on the lives of natural causes? Like, do we go to a nirvana? Do we go to a heaven? I just want to get your opinion from the scriptures, and then what have other rabbis said on this topic?
Well, I'll tell you what the other rabbis say. And I would say, and their response really would determine if the person's Jewish or not, unfortunately. Not if the person is necessarily Torah observant, but if they're halachically Jewish. It doesn't make ethical sense to me. It revolves around the statement of Kol Yisrael Yesh Lachem Chelek Le'olam Haba, which means that all of Israel gets a share in world to come, which is kind of an incorrect quote because they failed to read the next page, or the next section there that says, and these are the ones that don't. But they never teach that, mainly because they've chosen to entice ethnic Jews into observance instead of just drawing them via the plain, dry, sometimes boring truth. And the boring truth in this place, like in this case, is that if there's a world to come, decent people will get there. It doesn't matter pedigree. So it's interesting because when Christians make the same statement, and Christians do make the same statement slightly, people make fun of them. The Charles Stanley Southern Baptist Convention, once saved, always saved, is very similar to the Jewish idea that all Jews get a place in the world to come. Right? In this case, what makes them eligible as Jewish is being born of a Jewish mother. What makes them eligible as Christians is accepting Jesus. But this perpetual state of like, okay, you made it, it's forever now, is silly, whether it's uttered by a Christian person or a Jewish person. Right? We have to work out if there's any notion of salvation from that perspective daily. So that's the generally accepted opinion amongst Jews. Regarding Gentiles, like if you're a Gentile and you cease to exist, according to the most accepted Jewish opinion, if you're a Noahide, you get a share also in the world to come. And if you're not, you just cease to exist. And that's probably the most popular opinion. Now, there's other opinions Rabbi Eliezer holds, which is probably the half of all the rabbis at that time. People don't quote it, that Gentiles don't get anything, whether they're righteous or not. But I guess people think that doesn't sound good. It sounds good from a perspective that it encourages people to keep Torah and like want to be Jewish because it gives them an allotment in the world to come. But it sort of destroys the whole Noahide argument, so people don't mention it. And this is a very important statement in the Talmud. That's as much, I think, as the Torah says about it, or at least Rabbinic Judaism has to say about it. The Torah says nothing. First of all, the Torah doesn't make a distinction between Gentiles and Jews. It makes a distinction between people in the covenant and not in the covenant. The closest thing to anything after this world that appears in the Torah is the idea of being written in some book. We don't know what that means, but it seems that if you do what you're supposed to be doing, you'll be in God's good graces, and He'll write you in a book, whatever that happens to be. I hope I'm written in that book, and that's pretty well. It does talk about Abraham dying, being gathered into his fathers, and then being buried. So it seems like that is the more in terms of something more. From a Torah perspective, that's the most it tells us.
No, hey, real quick, speaking of Abraham, isn't there somewhere in the Talmud or maybe the Midrash where it talks about like Abraham welcoming those, like coming in to, or guarding hell to prevent any Jews from going in? Isn't there a story like that?
I'm not familiar with it. If there is, I'm not familiar with it. It talks about the Ohel Avraham, that Abraham had a tent, but it has something to do with him, like trying to keep Jews out of the afterlife. I mean, who would he be fighting against from that perspective?
Well, and not necessarily that. It's I can't remember where I read it, but it was something with either Abraham's standing at the gate. He's either standing at like the gate of hell to prevent any Jews from entering eternal damnation, or it was him greeting Jews in heaven. I forgot exactly what, but it was him guarding. So let me tell you my opinion and tell me what you think. So I know the main Christian idea is, if you believe in Jesus, you're going to heaven. If you don't, you're screwed. I feel like, though, the Bible's pretty clear that if we were to unalive, it's either in Job 12 or like Job 14, talks about a sleep-like state. I feel like the best case is even in Ecclesiastes, because here, that's Solomon basically telling you him being real, right? Like, hey, you can have a friend who steals his entire life, never get caught. You steal once, you get caught, you get the max punishment. I believe it's in chapter 10, where he basically where when you went alive, there's no knowledge, there's nothing in the grave where you are going. But then Isaiah talks about a new heavens and a new earth, I believe in 65. So I believe that if we were to unalive right now, we would be in a sleep-like state, and then Hashem would resurrect us, and we would be here.
Oh. Because it's not written anywhere. Who's to say you're wrong? That's a thing. Like I don't peddle art scroll Judaism, which is like if it says it in the art scroll, it's what Judaism. There is no monolithic idea on metaphysical concepts in Judaism. As much as the counter missionaries want to disagree, because they try to make it seem like, no, we know this for years. That's not talking about the Messiah. This is not talking about the Messiah. And then you find in other places that rabbis do refer to these verses talking about the Messiah. Whatever verse it may be, Isaiah chapter 9, Isaiah chapter 14, 7:14. I don't know. I'll tell you that I don't personally look at the prophets to try to expand my metaphysical understanding of God's will. I just don't, just because the job of the prophet is not there to do that. So I understand that it was rabbis essentially from a Jewish perspective who put together these books outside of the Torah. But to think that they were just trying to put together a puzzle, if it's a historical one, I get it, right, for context. But to sort of now take Job and take Isaiah and then come up with the doctrine, that's the problem I have. For me, there's a Torah and then there's everything else. And everything else, if it's sanctioned by our leaders, is there to bring you closer to the Torah, but not to in any way expand on the metaphysics of the Torah. Because I think it's a waste of time. Because nobody knows. And even if Isaiah, and I think Isaiah, the bulk of what he said, or they said, because I'm more convinced that it's two Isaiahs, was contingent either on our repentance or like on us not repenting. In other words, it's conditional. Every prophecy is conditional, and elaborate statements about a new heaven and a new earth. It just seems like it's an embellishment of when Israel finally does tshuva, but not necessarily that God is going to cause us not to sin. And he's going to put the Torah in our hearts. This is all poetry. Just because it would go against the Torah. The Torah doesn't talk about perpetual states of anything. Meaning, with the exception of perpetual obligations, like, yes, he wants us to keep commandments forever, or at least certain commandments forever. But the idea that the day is going to come where you won't be able to sin anymore and, everyone will know me, that's poetry. And it would have to be poetry, because if not, then it's contradicting the Torah. Because the Torah talks about history functioning in a circular fashion. It lays down formulas. You do this, that'll happen. But once you repent from that, then I'll bring you back to this over and over and over again. That's all it says. Now, because of poetry, hyperbole, symbolism, now we're going to rewrite the will of God. The average religious person, Jewish or Christian, if you tell them to explain their relationship with God and how they view God and their purpose in the world, they're almost never quote the Torah. They're almost always going to quote from a rabbinic perspective, Midrashim and Kabbalah, and from a Christian perspective, the prophets. When they were writing these books down, who would have thought? It's like, from a Christian perspective, when Paul was writing letters to churches and giving shout outs, like say hi to Benny, say hi to, Pablo, this and that. Who would have thought that a few centuries later, they would be quoting it alongside the Torah, like the word of God. They'll be extracting demons from people, like quoting the book of Galatians. It just sounds so primitive. It just sounds, it's a primitive approach. And I get it. Even the Torah itself, the only authoritative portions of the Torah, at least according to the Torah itself, is the revelation. The revelation that began on Sinai and ended at the end of Deuteronomy. That's what's authoritative, not the narrative. I mean, you got people, Kabbalists, quoting verses from Genesis that they're giving you a chronological understanding of Jewish history, and they're quoting it, from a Kabbalistic perspective, also to extract demons. Jews do this also, by the way. I remember I was in Aish in the Old City, and I ran into Yom Tov Glazer. He's a pretty famous rabbi now. He was called the surfing rabbi back then. And he was exorcising demons. How's he say? Excising demons, from someone. What they call it, removing the Yetzer Hara. So they remove the evil eye from among you. It's nonsense. Nonsense. But I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, Will. I'm just saying that that's just like your opinion, man.
Well, I feel like, and I mean, I can't really, think of. I wasn't really prepared to come up here. I just was scrolling through TikTok, saw you were alive. Wanted to pick your brain, but I mean, it talks about it in Job. Yeah, I mean, with Ecclesiastes, I don't really feel like we can get around it. So with the idea that Christians have of, we're believing Jesus, you go to heaven. I even know rabbinically there are rabbis that talk about the paradise, Ken, that you brought up. All I'm saying is all of that is absent from the Tanakh. Nowhere do we see from the Torah, the writings of the prophets, where if we were to unalive now, we would be in a type of paradise. If anything, it talks about a sleep-like state. And the only argument you can make is from Isaiah, talking about like the new heaven and new earth. So clearly there would be a resurrection to come up. Because think about it. If Adam and Eve never sinned, if they listened to God, they would still be alive and we would all be on the earth with them, right? In a perfect Garden of Eden. I mean, we would all be here. There would be no sin. We would live forever. We would fear God, know him, and that would be the paradise. So I feel like God's ultimately trying to get us back to that location.
Uh-huh. All right. It's funny when I read the book of Genesis, the first portions. I mean, I think that came to us from legend. That understanding of Adam and Eve and how God created the world, but I'm not convinced that itself is considered Torah. Right? I mean, Torah is not the narrative within the Torah. Torah means instructions. That's all it means. On Mount Sinai, we never received 5 books of Moses. The reason I lay it down like this is because I can't open myself up to be vulnerable to an atheist, because there's many, I would say most angry atheists on TikTok were former religious people. Like, who's this guy, this angry guy, Jeff, right? Like, there's some guy with a southern accent here who just spends all day long destroying people's faith and offering them nothing in return. It just seems like they're all these atheists are really wounded theists. Like, I mean, somebody hurt them in their past. And you can't, when you're trying to win such a discussion with these people, you have to be very accurate. You have to be, I mean, you just can't be quoting the book of Job and Isaiah to paint a picture from an authoritative perspective, because that's what churches do all day long. And, Jews do a similar thing, at least with rabbinic literature. Just because I guess their congregants want an answer instead of saying, you know what, we just don't know. And there's something wrong with just saying we don't know, but you're free to speculate. They're like, no, pastor or rabbi, I want to know how to get to heaven. Our patriarchs in the Torah only did the right thing, it seems, because it was the right thing to do. It never says that Abraham followed God because he didn't want to get caught in hell, or it just seems like a form of coercion nowadays. The average pastor who meets you on the street or missionary, the first thing he asks you is like, if you die today, do you know where you will spend eternity? A concept that's not concrete in the Bible. All right, yeah.
So I mean, I agree with you. I'm not saying like people have to believe what I believe regarding with Job, Ecclesiastes, Isaiah, stuff like that. All I'm saying is there's zero evidence throughout the Tanakh that says anything of, we're going to go to heaven, we're going to be in the sky, we're going to be hanging out with God. And, people, that one kid even wrote a book where he said that he, unalived for like 11 minutes and he was in heaven, later came out and said, I lied, which I give him credit for being honest. But he just did it for the attention and the money.
Yeah. Well, he could have had a dream. I mean, there's many people who have dreams. There's this guy, Alona Nava. I think he lives in Svat. He's like a Kabbalistic rabbi. That was his whole main claim to fame. Just like Yaron Reuven has the, Wall Street guy becomes a rabbi, whatever. But Alona Nava was like a rock star, or I don't know, like an Israeli musician who has a near-death experience, and then he says he goes up to heaven, and he sees all the big rabbis. Coincidence, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, like all of them. It's I don't know what's everybody else. He wasn't dead at that time, but yeah, I think he saw the Baba Sali and all the stuff, and that was his whole thing. People started believing him and started getting scared into becoming religious. I don't know if God wants that. I don't think God wants to.
Okay, but exactly though. But my thing with that is with Job and Ecclesiastes, it literally says you are asleep. There's no knowledge, no wisdom, no anger, no hatred, no discussing, no consciousness. There is nothing in the grave where we are going. And it says that in the grave where we are going. So if that rabbi was alive now, I would ask him, the Tanakh clearly says we go to Sheol, we don't go to heaven, we don't go there. So when he says that he went there, it contradicts the Tanakh. So then we would have to say Ecclesiastes is wrong, Job is wrong. Other verses.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I mean, being put in Sheol, like the pit, means your physical body, that you physically get placed into a pit. It's theorizing what happens with the spiritual aspect of your existence. So from that perspective, people could theorize and write books on it, and it doesn't contradict the Torah because the Torah just doesn't mention it.
Right, but Ecclesiastes talks about a consciousness, not just the body. It talks about the brain itself.
Oh, I think that when religious people talk about a consciousness in the afterlife, that's minus a brain. Like it might be the notion of a mind. There's a distinction between brain and mind. I mean, even in modern day life, right? I mean, it's maybe brain back then was your heart, right? And your mind was, something that's not tangible, something that's not physical, possibly. But who knows?
I just went out real quick and grab the Bible.
Grab the Bible. Like the Black Hebrews say, you have to grab the sword. They say sword.
I'm gonna hit you with some Paul stuff.
All right, yeah. I'm not.
Well, no, hey, but going back to your previous comment real quick, not trying to change the subject, but I agree with you because even like 2 or 3 times with Paul's letters, he even says, "This is what I say, not the Lord."
Oh, that's
right. So how can we put something on the same level of the Torah that's man's opinion? So that's my argument to all those guys that do that.
It sounds like you're in some way like thinking your way out of Christianity, or from whatever. Not Christianity,
I don't consider myself a Christian.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm like out of the apostolic writings. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, how's that any different than a rabbi? The rabbi saying his opinion to his community. It's no different.
Yeah, for sure. No, right. No, that's not the. What do you mean? With Paul, you mean?
Well, here's the problem. Because we can't really verify everything in life, and we can't accurately say this is right and this is wrong. We know accurately say this is true and this is false. So it's very hard to figure out like what's actually authentically real and what's not, and we just have to try our best.
Yeah, no, that's not the issue here. Where the issue here is in the case of Paul, let's say, well, the issue is people now canonizing the letters of Paul as divinely inspired texts, right? I mean, it's not just the great ideas of a genius, let's say, how it is in the Jewish world. In the Jewish world, that we could admire a great mind and have pictures of them in our houses, but we won't say it's divinely inspired text. At least not normal people will. I mean, some people, they elevate every book they like to divinely inspired text. But divinely inspired means that you make no distinction between the book of Exodus and, that book. So there has to be a systematic theology on how we classify books. It can't all be one big chulent of ideas, because then that's how things, it just keeps on changing, and it's not going to resemble what you started off with. So it's all about separation. For some reason, we're always making a distinction between what's rabbinic and what's from the Torah, constantly. Nowadays, it doesn't even exist anymore.
People say the Holy Zohar, same concept.
It's wrong. I mean, they shouldn't say.
Did Paul ever forbid anyone from observing a festival?
I don't know. I mean, that's for the believers.
No.
Or Shabbat? He didn't. The difference between Paul and the Noahide is that Paul never said that people deserve to be killed if they dare to observe a Shabbat. In the case of the Noahides, they deserve to be killed if they dare to observe it.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not pushing the Noahide laws. I mean, the Rambam doesn't teach it like that, but I could see how someone, who takes a statement straight could.
No, but I'm just saying the Noahide is like a Chinese forgery of Paul's approach to Gentiles.
It's got to be Chinese. It can't be a Chinese forgery. Yeah,
Here, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
All right, so here, I got it. All right, so this is from Ecclesiastes 9, 5-10. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. Verse 7, go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days, for this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom.
Yep. That sounds.
So I feel like Solomon here is just giving out his, this is what's different from Proverbs. Proverbs talks about, yes, if you do good things will happen to you, right? But that's not necessarily true. So this is where Ecclesiastes comes in, where Solomon's being 100% honest with us, and just says, yes, when we go to the grave, because that's where we're going, so we're not going to heaven.
Yeah, what's this notion of 100% honest? The rabbis weren't going to include this book Kohelet because he sounds like such a nebuch in the book, and they're saying that the reason he's so like a wet blanket is because he wrote this very late in his life, saying that when the rabbis, because they're explaining it like this, is because they understand this is not divinely inspired text. There's a difference between sanctioning a book, right, saying okay, it's okay for you to study this, and saying now it's the word of God, right? It's all meaningless. Everything's meaningless. I'm not saying it's bad. But someone talked about how they call the Zohar the Zohar Kadosh, like the Holy Zohar. Now, if that statement was made in the time of the Rambam, it wouldn't bother me. If the statement is made today, it means they're elevating it to the perspective of Torah, because holy just means set apart. From that perspective, we could say the book of Ecclesiastes is set apart, right? Like it's a book that we respect. We don't just throw it on the floor, but that doesn't mean it's divinely inspired text. And I just feel that this is a form of thinking that people have to graduate to. This is why I think people who believe in Yeshua and Paul and elevate the New Testament are always going to be limited in their growth, because they keep on viewing the scriptures from a Christian perspective, even though they may not identify as Christians. Like who quotes the book of Jeremiah to in some way, override or extend their theology? No, it's only there to bring you back to the Torah. That's it. I don't know. Yeah, and it's hard enough to defend the Torah on its own. To on top of that, against an atheist, try to defend the book of Job, right? The book of Isaiah, the book. It's like, my gosh, and forget about the book of Daniel. That's all over the place.
By the way, you bring Solomon, but David said, I will see your face with righteousness. I will satisfy with your image upon the awakening. That's after he died.
Yeah, and also King Solomon said, out of 1,000 men, I found one righteous. Out of 1,000 women, I found none. But they never quote this. I mean, it's like straight red pill stuff. But anyway.
Right, but I feel like we should give the credit to Ecclesiastes because Solomon was considered the wisest person to ever live on this earth.
That's a midrash, guys. Okay, let's put this to rest now. The notion that King Solomon is the wisest person who ever lived was a legend. It's a fairy tale, even though it appears in Tanakh. You don't have to believe it, right? I mean, the wisest person who ever lived on this earth, married a bunch of idolaters, and only at the end of his life, did he return to Torah observance. I know that it appears in what people call the Holy Bible, but that is not a statement given over by God. That's part of Jewish tradition, right? It's like you don't have to believe it in order to be a kosher Jew, and that's what people. Yeah.
Okay. No, you're right. You're right. When we read the text, it says that he wants wisdom to judge Israel, like to judge Israel justly. I believe it what it technically says. So you're right. It's not that he asked for wisdom; he asked to judge Israel justly, right? And the whole story of the two moms with the child, how he found out which one the child belongs to. Israel was shocked and was like, "Wow, he is so wise." So I give that to you there. But with Ecclesiastes, because he was so old, because he did so many wrongs, I think he's reflecting on everything. Having all the women, having all this power, it's meaningless at the end of the day if you're still limited with your life. I think that's what he's alluding to. So, I mean, I feel like we have all these older rabbis that we look up to for their wisdom, but we should look to Solomon and his wisdom that he has when he writes stuff like this, especially with Ecclesiastes, where he talk about everything's meaningless. Like it is. At the end of the day, we're all going to go to the grave. So how should we spend our life? I think that's what he's doing by begging the question.
All right, continue. Hold on 1 second.
So, and I do feel like, Rabbi, you'll actually like this one. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 2. It says, the heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. And we know that conservative people are right-winged, and we know that the leftists
Here we go.
are liberal. So the heart of the wise inclines to the right, or conservative. So conservatives are wise, but the heart of the fool to the left, to liberal. So fools are liberals.
All right, hold on. No, that makes good sense.
Asher, do you believe Isaiah was chronologically in order?
No, of course not. I mean, how
I
could
know.
I mean,
By the way, I had a discussion with the Jehuda the other day in regards to Isaiah 36 through 39 in regards to Hezekiah. Because if you look at the order of and you compare it to history, it doesn't make sense.
yeah.
It does not
So
make sense.
Isaiah was the prophet to Israel when Israel was being besieged by the Assyrians and the kingdom of the north. So this is before the Babylonian exile. This is before Israel ever went to exile. So first of all, this destroys the idea that Isaiah 53 is talking about Israel as a suffering servant, because at this point in time, Israel didn't suffer yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, the Babylonian captivity happened after this. Jeremiah happened after this. But the second half of Isaiah, the reason people assume, and Ibn Ezra as well, I believe, also assumes that it's a different Isaiah, is because now we're living Like we're reading a book where Cyrus is mentioned, right? I mean, this is way in the future, and they're saying, "Oh, he wrote this, by Ruach HaKodesh." It's hard enough as religious people to defend the Torah. Now we have to defend essentially rabbinic creative writing here, like only because they want to lump in as many statements in the book of Daniel that actually don't make any sense, and every cult just uses them to just further divide God's people. It's problematic, and I don't know why there aren't enough religious people calling it out, and they just sort of just peddle the narrative over and over and over again, and it's just we're losing too many people to atheism because of
that's the thing, and like I was discussing Hezekiah, and I'm like, how can anyone believe that Hezekiah was the guy from Isaiah 9 when Hezekiah had to bribe Assyria just like his father and his son, and on top of that, all the fortified cities of Judah were destroyed and seized by Assyria, something that didn't happen with his father or his son or any other Davidic king.
Sure.
So they were bringing the last 15 years being peaceful. I'm like, they were being peaceful because he went back to bribing the Syria.
It's funny.
I
was listening to some Torah class. No, it wasn't Torah. It was this Christian guy. This guy who's like the student of Sam Shimoni, or whatever his name is.
Oh God,
Albie, whatever. So Albie was quoting like and like Joseph mentioned this. I think Joseph like on YouTube. You guys can see that we're on YouTube as well, and like on Facebook, on how the Rambam quotes Isaiah chapter 9 to be referring to the Messiah, and also quotes Isaiah chapter 7 to be referring to the Messiah. Mm-hmm. This is something that it's true most Jews will not acknowledge because it goes very much against the counter-missionary perspective. But it shows that people are only given one perspective here, which is just the defeat Christian / Messianic perspective. And this whole notion of always having to defend an agenda. My agenda is to expand Torah observance. That's my agenda. In terms of changing people's theology, keep theology. I don't care. I think my time is better spent getting Christians to become Torah observant. And I mean, eventually, I believe that they will drop the New Testament, but it's not, it doesn't matter to me, essentially. Because I don't think it matters who you think the Messiah is.
For one, I appreciate letting me join the live. I just want to make sure I'm coming in and not stepping on toes. What is the topic of this live based about, essentially? Okay. I'm in trouble grasping that.
Hold on 1 second. I'm trying to...
It's like Seinfeld. It's everything.
That's right.
Everything.
We need to be
everything, but it's always to push people back to Torah observance.
Got you. Yeah. But you say, Mike, for Consider Judaism, I'm someone who likes to see every single body's perspective, no matter what the situation is on. Because I'm Muslim. I'm not religious, but I'm Muslim, and I naturally, there's obviously a divide going with what's been going on. But with that being said, are you able to seriously rationalize what is going on? It's definitely both sides at hand, but are you able to, how can you, I'm just trying to see how you can defend that without.
What? Defend what?
Are you talking about Palestine or something?
This is like every week.
Yeah.
No, forget about Palestine. We don't want to talk about that.
I know
anything with that. It's political.
You know what I mean?
Oh, jeez. Okay, hey, anyways, Rabbi Asher, who's the guy next to you? On YouTube, I think?
Who?
Who's the other guy?
There's 5 other people on the live panel on YouTube.
Okay, so to the guy who's talking, who do you think that Isaiah 9 is talking about? Because I think he said he doesn't believe it's Hezekiah.
No, he's not. Pepe.
Yeah.
Pepe.
All right, hold on. All right, so Habchi, I will have the discussion with you, but give me 5 minutes, okay?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not coming in hostile at all.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm trying to learn.
Sure. All right. we'll make it slightly political for for a segment. Although, like, I don't identify as a Zionist, by the way, but I do support the state of Israel, which is probably a perspective that most Palestinians are not familiar with.
Most of them can't fathom it.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, no problem. I mean, that just shows how heavenly good that there's no earthly good. Like, if you can't fathom the notion of tolerating something secular because it's the greater good, then in some way establishing something religious when it's going to unalive the vast majority of the inhabitants. So it's a balance. I mean, you wanted to talk about reason and logic. That's the first litmus test. The first litmus test is the idea that we can be tolerant and at the same time claim to be religious. While I think the primitive mind gets stuck on first stage thinking, that because your book tells you to do something, you will do it no matter how many people actually get harmed via its completion. I mean, not necessarily because the book is flawed, but because
So you're
humans...
all of the people being killed is for the greater good. That's what you're telling me.
No, I didn't even mention...
This is going to be
Israel
literally a
unaliving people,
gaslighting
by the way.
live.
No, it's not. It's genuinely not.
Okay,
Okay.
fine.
It's not trying to.
All right, let's do it for 5 minutes. Go ahead. Okay. I didn't mention the idea that all the people who are getting killed are for the greater good. I'm trying to balance out the idea how you can be religious and at the same time support secular pursuits. Now, can you do that?
Please, just what does secular mean?
Irreligious.
You're asking me if I support.
Can you do both?
Pursue something otherworldly, and what's the other option?
Religious.
I think if you truly operate with your consciousness and segment everything, you can. I really do believe you can.
Okay. So I commend that. I would say that the average Palestinian cannot.
Okay.
Meaning, when people become too heavenly good that they're no earthly good, then they never have to apologize for the blood and carnage that they leave behind. One idea that we have both in Judaism and in Christianity is that we're never going to be able to live in an idyllic state unless God himself sanctions it. And with Judaism, we call this the Messianic Age, and in Christianity, they call that the second coming of Christ. However, Islam believes in caliphate now. I mean, there are many Jews, you would say Mashiach now, like irrational Jews, like in some sort of global caliphate now. We can do it. We can institute perfection. While I think the reasonable people understand that perfection is not the goal. It's just leaving this world a little better than we found it. Because Jews are in exile, God himself tells us, don't war against his will, to pray for the governments of where he exiles us to pray for the leaders, to build houses, obviously to instill values as much as we can, because we still have to be redeemed because of those values. But the idea that we're going to in some way force people to think in a certain way, if not, they'll be unalived or they can't live among us, is not what God wants for us now. It may be what he wants for us in the future when he establishes the kingdom, but this is the dividing line between Muslims and Jews. Muslims can't even tolerate a secular argument. If they're religious, their religious side will win every time. While sometimes, I commend Israel, let's say. I'm not for the GAY community, but Israel gives asylum to GAY individuals in that region who would otherwise be unalived by their intolerant host countries. Israel is tolerant from that perspective, even though it goes against my Torah. Who would I rather be running the show? A bunch of clerics or Hasidic rabbis, or people who are fair and tolerant? At this point in time, I would gladly make a separation between synagogue and state, because religious people at this point in time cannot be trusted to lead. That's it. Now, we could be trusted to reiterate what the Bible says, instill values in our society, but Muslims get stuck on first stage thinking. They're in a rut. They're like, well, if the Quran says to do this, the Quran established what's true and what's not true.
In a rut?
Yes.
Okay, understood. I see exactly, after listening, I see exactly where you're coming from. And I want to, for one, get all this, what you guys think is spitefulness out. Since growing up, I've always had an admiration for Jewish people. You guys have been stayed in exile, and for you, I respect the loyalty you guys have amongst each other, how you guys bring it up, and you guys are intelligent.
We're still in exile, by the way. Israel is still in exile. Like, I don't support the state of Israel from a religious perspective. It's a secular country. I support Israel over Palestine, like I support India over Pakistan. That's it.
Understood. But the point is, with that being said, there's a moral compass, and there's a lack of it on one side more than the other. And I truthfully believe it's indisputable, and it's oil and water. What is going on? It's inevitable. So they're never going to really see eye to eye. And that's deeper than surface level. That's deeper than any term, any empirical evidence. It's nature. I think it's really nature. It's literally intuitive nature, and a natural divide, especially when people are operating off their core baselines and operating off instinct and emotion.
I don't know.
And not being based.
Like the last 30 seconds, I don't know anything. I mean, I don't understand what you just said in the last 30 seconds. It's nature. What's nature?
I just think what is going on is it's meant to happen. It's the natural essence. What I mean by that is it's inevitable. Like it's something that it's two people around each other who are so similar in a lot of ways, but have differences that make them, I think, like I said, oil and water. That's an
yes, they're oil and water because they're not similar in almost any way. Israelis have nothing in common with Palestinians.
But the point I'm trying to say, Rabbi, is with this divide, it's indisputable. It's oil and water, and they're different. They're very different, and I just think it's parallel. They're never going to meet. They're never going to cross and enter. I just think...
but it has nothing to do with Jews, by the way.
People, and the ancestral, how you guys are.
Yeah, but forget about us guys. Here, listen. If Israel was Christian, if Israel was a Christian country, the hate would still be there between the Palestinians.
Why are people saying stay mad? I'm not mad. I'm just expressing myself.
No, right. No, I get it. Yeah, but it has nothing to do with Jews. If Israel was a Christian country and Muslims would have to be subordinate to these Christian leaders, they would be made to suffer, probably even worse, because Muslims have more in common with Jews than they do with Christians. So it has nothing to do with Jews. It has to do with...
How much more in common? I like to say your cousins.
No,
your cousins
fine.
Just look at Lebanon.
Yeah, right. I mean, look at Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon used to be majority Christian. Now it's getting close to being majority Muslim because Muslims cannot be subjugated. They cannot be docile. Right? It's just
It's our essence. It's our pridefulness. It's how we are.
No, I get it. But it has nothing to do with Jews then. It has to do with Islam and everybody else.
It's just an unfortunate situation. It's like placed. It's sad. It's just fucking sad.
So then I think that I have the most reasonable solution for it all. And that's encourage Judaism as an alternative to radical Islam towards Palestinians.
You can't, but at the same time, you got to understand there are Zionists and there are people who are pushing an agenda, whether you want to admit it or not.
No,
there are people.
I admit it for sure.
With hatefulness, and there are people who I know who are in an utter state of joyfulness, seeing what's going on to the other side.
Oh, yeah, but I wouldn't consider those as Zionists, by the way. I would say, I mean, as someone who's a settler.
But there are Zionists who have that.
Yeah, okay. It's just because when I think Zionist, I think of I don't know, some secular guy sitting in the Knesset. I was a settler for 5 years in Israel. I lived in a place called Kohav Shachar, like in what people call the West Bank. We called it Binyamin. And yes, the hilltop settlers probably would like the Baruch Goldsteins and the Kach, Kahanachai and all that stuff. Perhaps, but those aren't real Zionists. Like, they don't identify as Zionists. They actually want to take the government over. There was a movement called the Kingdom of Judea.
I think a lot of Israel's diluted with people who say Jew but aren't actually real Jews.
Well, they're not religious Jews. I mean, they may be ethnic Jews.
But you could say ethnic, religious. I just think there's a lot of like fraudulent. Is for one, why in Israel are DNA tests illegal? That's just baffling to me. Why is it illegal?
You know, I don't think it's illegal. I mean, I've heard people say it over and over again.
This isn't. I'm not just saying that it is.
Okay,
It's
I mean,
illegal.
like most claims made by the other side are typically unsubstantiated. I've known people in Israel who've done Ancestry.com. I mean, most of these tests don't take place in Israel. I'm not familiar with the idea. I mean, it may be true, but it sounds like unsubstantiated to me. Like, why would they be? Anyways, next point.
But I just think, like I said, one thing I know, one reason I feel like there's such an abundant amount of great financial literacy amongst the Jewish community. Correct me if I'm wrong. You guys are the first people to implement interest, right?
No. I mean, where do you come up? The notion of interest exists. You know, we talk.
So, freaking Mesopotamia was the first people recorded to do that. By the way, I just want to point that out.
Yeah,
It's
although
like
interest is
Jewish
a beautiful
people-
thing, like my friend Chris would allude to, right?
But
Thank
Jewish
God
people-
for money lending.
What I'm trying to say is, in essence,
the
like you guys
economy
have
would
been.
fall apart without it. You kidding me?
Yeah, but Jewish people historically have been good at managing and implementing ways of money. There's just certain things. I'm saying that's one
In
difference.
the Ashkenazi world.
But they were forced into it by the Christians. It was because Christians couldn't lend to other Christians with interest, so they forced the Jews to lend with interest.
Okay, right. But with that, it forced you guys to have more experience with it. In
I don't
Islam,
know
the
about
way
that.
they are, the way their essence is, they can't do that. That like contradicts them. That's like haram to them. They really believe in like helping their community. And
So
the
that's actually
Jewish
not true, by the
people as
way.
Well, but they go about it in different ways,
Hold on,
and there's
hold on.
different morals and ethics,
Okay.
and that really contradicts the state of the world right now, and it's creating these problems.
Okay.
And people are gonna think they can change it, but it's just feel like if people just accept that they're much different and they have a different perspective, and you can't, and they might not even be able to understand where you're coming from. They might see it, but they won't understand. I think that will create much more unity. Because I had a friend, man, who's Jewish, and I'm telling you, we had like beef over something like small, but there's a deeper level meaning to it. And I don't want to get into it, but him and I had a talk, and we're as tight as ever.
Okay, I mean that sounds kind of weird. I don't believe that any of this hatred or the problem with any person here is inherent. Like it's part of their DNA. It just sounds silly. It's ideological for sure. It's just like Islam is ultimately an ideology. I don't think the average Jew has an ideology, right? I mean, like you could say he has a Western mindset just because most Jews in Israel aren't religious. Because they have a Western mindset, then they embrace the idea of tolerance. And that's all you can ask from your leaders today, to let the little guy speak. Yeah, I would say
But the problem is, one thing is when the little guy has power, when the little guy gets to have control, due to the little guy's sheer insignificance, by nature, you're going to have her overcompensate, have these traits that people are hating and bringing up about these people, such as being cunning, non-remorseful.
Oh, that's not what I meant by the little guy. In Israel, the little guy could be deemed Arabs who sit on the Supreme Court, Arabs who are judges, Arabs who are doctors, Arabs who are politicians. The statistics show that in around 40 or 50 years, the majority of the inhabitants of Israel proper, I'm not talking about Gaza, Jenin, or whatever, the West Bank, Israel proper is going to be Arab. So only in a tolerant society could this happen. This would never happen in Gaza because Jews aren't allowed to live in Gaza. So it shows that tolerance is a virtue even when it empowers your enemies.
You know, Asher, talking about tolerance.
Yeah.
I went over the. Let me tell you, over the Christmas break, I went with my wife's Orthodox Jewish family to London, and she had planned to visit a synagogue, the oldest synagogue in the English-speaking world for Sephardics, and I was not allowed to go into the synagogue. They didn't allow me. Only the Jewish.
No, it's a problem.
Because I was not a Jew.
I understand. No, this happens in many places. Many, like outside of America and in Canada, they typically won't let you into a synagogue unless you're Jewish.
Yeah, but I mean, her whole family is Jewish. Is Orthodox Jew. And then didn't allow him.
No, it's like this. When I went to Colombia,
Yeah.
I had to call beforehand and have a whole conversation with the rabbi in order for him to let me into the synagogue. There's Israelis who show up at the synagogue and they don't let them in
But actually, she with months in advance, she emailed the synagogue, and all
Yeah,
the
no, it's wrong. It's wrong. I mean,
and when we got there, the rabbi didn't see her email, so whatever.
yeah, no, it's completely wrong. This is why we do the show. I don't justify what all these. I get it. If you do it for security reasons, it's one thing, but the way they do it is for sure an overkill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's silly. Unfortunately, Chabad pushes this more than anyone because they're the ones that have Chabad houses all over the world. Like people say, there's a Chabad in India, yeah, but Indians can't go in. Right? So it's like all these outposts are pretty much there for Jews who are traveling. But this is what we're changing, right? And we're not really changing it. We're trying to go back to what I believe was the initial message of Judaism, and that's it. It's universal. It's whoever wants it. Not like if you're an Israeli citizen or like if you're an ethnic Jew. But yes, tolerance as much as
If you read the book of Acts, a lot of the Gentiles back then were going to the synagogues. I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
you know what I mean? So I guess that intolerance grew over time. I don't know.
Yeah, this is why. I mean, I don't want there to be another temple to be rebuilt now, and I don't want the Messiah to come now because the question is, who's going to run it now? Now, assuming if God ushers in the actual Messiah, but someone who claims to be Mashiach, right? Because according to the Rambam, if he helps build the Beit HaMikdash, then he's Mashiach V'dai. He's the actual Messiah. So anyone could just rebuild the temple. We had the Temple Mount in 1967. I don't want Toldos and Bubba or anyone to be running the temple and the Sanhedrin, because then, I mean, if they can't get along now, can you imagine if they were given actual power?
But actually, there's no prophecy about second temple being destroyed and another one being built. I mean, not one. You know what I mean?
Oh, interesting, because it's true. The book of Ezekiel is now prophesying the third temple. It's prophesying the second temple.
That's right.
But so Rabbi Akiva was the one who made the argument because they weren't going to include Sefer Yehezkel into the canon and what they call Sforim that are Mitamei Yadayim. So what he said was he justified the book of Ezekiel because there's some inaccuracies on his temple and then the measurements of the Mishkan. And he says that that's the third temple, the Beis HaMikdash Shomala, like the one in heaven.
Yeah.
That's coming down. So the rabbis understood, okay, that we'll let it pass. Although the Gemara tells us, don't read Haftarah and Sefer Yehezkel, at least in certain portions of it. So the average person just sort of peddles what they hear over and over again, but it's just not there.
Yeah, and even though I'm an evangelical, I'm against their belief about the third temple, and that's a relatively new idea, because the early Christian church didn't believe about a third temple.
Oh, okay. So we do believe in a third, fourth, and fifth temple. It doesn't hurt.
No. I know, but I mean, like Revelation talks about basically the heavenly Jerusalem, just similar to what Chabad thinks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it says that with the New Jerusalem, it's going to come down. Yeah, according to the Torah, just the Torah alone, it seems that we're going to have an unlimited amount of temples, because the Torah really doesn't deal with prophecy; it deals with formulas. Mm-hmm. So the formula is that when Israel begins to disobey God, God sends them prophetic intervention. This is Deuteronomy chapter 18, right? He sends us prophets. If we don't listen to the prophets, then all the klalot fall upon us, like Deuteronomy 28, 29, like all the curses, they hit Israel. And then only when Israel repents in Leviticus 26 does God bring us back to Israel. So that's not a prophetical. That's a formula. That's going to happen over and over again. What's taught nowadays is that God's going to give you a lobotomy, a religious lobotomy, which means those who are familiar with all these botched lobotomies in the 40s, when a woman had all these independent ideas and all this stuff, they would take them and they would operate on the front lobe of the brain and in some way modify their thinking physically. And so they wouldn't think in a certain manner anymore. So that's essentially what they believe God's going to do if we're going to have a third and final temple. Remember, we're always supposed supposed to lose the temple or the sanctuary whenever Israel sins? Well, if something's going to be perpetual, it's going to be forever. It means Israel's not going to be able to sin, right? So then we'll go into Galut again. But there is no more exile, right? This is the final Galut, right? I mean, with the Gullus of Edom, supposed to be, according to the Kabbalists, the final Gullus. So I don't think these ideas have been thought out through, for sure, because they trample. I mean, they're almost antithetical to the message in the Torah.
Has Israel ever returned from Galut because the Shekinah left? I mean, isn't the whole purpose in Torah is when you see the tabernacle, you see Hashem in the tabernacle, and supposedly that was the case in the first temple. But then after the second temple, there's no record of anything like that.
Yeah. So I don't think that's a sign that you're redeemed, right? I mean, for sure. I mean, there was no Ark of the Covenant in the second temple, right? All right. I mean, the fire from heaven, right, wasn't there. But the idea is that in a redeemed state, if you keep Torah, God could usher your I mean, you'd have to disagree with Ezra and Nehemiah then, right? That God actually accepted the repentance.
Well, you could be repentant and return and start the process, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Hashem will dwell among us. Oh no, there's not a full repentance in gathering.
So in Ezra and Nehemiah, they weren't building the temple; they were building the altar. Because I mean, there is no temple. All right, I mean, there's only a mishkan. Right? I mean, now a temple is just a mishkan, like a sanctuary with a stone base. So after they build the altar, where they cried out to God, and then it seems, according to the narrative, that God accepted their repentance. But the idea of God dwelling around you, I mean, I don't know how you can prove that happens. If you believe the Shekhinah is a sign of that, it just doesn't say that necessarily. God could be dwelling around you, but if there's no Ark of the Covenant, how could there be fire from heaven? Because the fire, I believe, like fell down on the Ark. The question is, what, you can't have Judaism if you don't have an Ark? I mean, it's a question. I mean, for sure, it's a question. I mean, it doesn't open the door for some other theology to say, like, like our book in some way tells us all the.
Yeah, I understand that. But I mean, if you stick just to Torah, it just seems like that was the goal for Hashem to dwell among us, and so Malkut Shemaim, for him to rule over as a kingdom. And
well, Israel did exist without an ark for some time when the Philistines took it. In exile in Babylon, which the exile was prophesied. God said that, yes, you're going to go into Babylon, but then he's going to bring you back. So all this was prophesied. I mean, that you'd be cutting out a lot of books of Jewish history to assume that no ark means no Israel.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that as a people, we have not fulfilled the commandment to have the kingdom of heaven on earth, to establish the true nation of Israel, as God commanded.
On earth, I mean, that's not a Torah concept. I mean, that's an embellished idea in the poetry of the prophets. The pinnacle of Jewish sovereignty was King Solomon. I think almost everyone acknowledges. I mean, he's called Shlomo, because his whole existence was like Shalem, was complete. That means it was peaceful. There was no war. And he was still, sleeping around with idolatrous women, as exciting as that may sound. Right? So I think that we over-embellish the idea. Like, who wants heaven on earth? I don't. I mean, because I don't want people bossing me around. I mean, telling me.
Wait, say that again? You don't want heaven on earth?
Of course not. I mean,
you don't want Hashem ruling over the earth.
Wait, hold on.
Sorry.
Heaven, yeah, go ahead.
Heaven is heaven and earth is earth, and if God wanted to make another heaven, he would have made another heaven. Instead.
It's a euphemism. So do you, let's say, just say God's rule, kingship on earth?
I'd be happy. It's interesting because the throne of David is also, in the same breath, called God's throne. Like it seems that God ruling us just means that there's a priesthood and there's a king. And under the auspices of these individuals does he rule. The idea that God rules amongst us and rolls amongst us, and I don't want that. Right? I mean, it's like hiring inviting a fire marshal, for your like July the 4th firework show. It's like I don't think that's the goal, and it wasn't the goal in the Torah either. I mean, the idea that heaven on earth, it seems more like a Christian idea.
No, what do you mean the Mishkan?
The Mishkan is a traveling sanctuary. I mean,
Right. So returning to that.
So there being a Mishkan, so what? That when you're in the tent of meeting, I mean,
To have the presence of God.
I mean, okay. So now you're changing your tone a little bit.
No, that's what I mean from the beginning.
It's building a temple. I mean, it's again, there was a temple during Solomon's age, and it was in heaven on earth. It was peaceful, and we were in charge. Yeah, it's just when I hear heaven and earth from someone who believes in the New Testament, I'm thinking of the last chapters of Revelation. When
that's a concept within the Mishnah, Malkut Shemayim.
I'm not
denying
it's rabbinic. Huh? I'm not denying it's rabbinic. I'm denying that it's in the Torah. For sure, the Christians didn't make this up. I mean, they took it from mystical Jewish ideas. Right? I mean, people who are big on Rashi believe that we're not supposed to try to build a temple because it has to come down from heaven. Right? So yes, these ideas are essentially Jewish. They're not Torah. Something could be Jewish and part of Judaism and not anywhere in the Torah. It's just because it's what the religion or like the religious people happen to believe.
Did you say Rashi says that or believes that we shouldn't try to build a temple?
I think that's the understanding, that he said that it's coming down from heaven. That the way you build it is by repenting.
Oh, okay. Hey, Rabbi, I have a question, a halakhic question, if I may. How do you live today with? And sorry to change the subject a little bit, if you don't mind. How do you live today with Tuma and Taha? Like,
what's the big deal? There's no temple.
Like, what do you mean? Could you elaborate a little bit?
Yes. Okay. So he's asking me, like, how do I live with the notion of impurity, like spiritual sense of impurity in my life? I mean, Tuma, the notion of Tahar doesn't even apply because we don't have like the ashes of the red heifer. So being impure, and I know that the word Tameh is not translated well when people call it impure, but it means unfit. It means that you're unfit to enter the temple. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. Oh, no, there's an echo. Chief, please mute. Don't worry, I'll try to mute you. All right.
Is this a good time for me to introduce?
Yeah, sorry. I'll bring you back, Chief. I just, yeah. So it's not, it's as bad as a woman is after she has a child and doesn't offer a turtle dove, let's say, right? I mean, it's as bad as the man who has a nocturnal emission and doesn't immerse himself, right? It's not bad. It just means that you're unfit to enter the temple. Everybody today is unfit to enter the temple because of Tumat Met. So Tumat Met is the impurity that attaches to you because of contact with the dead body. It doesn't mean that you necessarily had contact with the dead body, but someone in your vicinity did, and we're all tainted. That doesn't make you in any way further away from God. I mean, from a physical perspective, we had a temple, yes, because you couldn't offer any avoda, you couldn't do the service inside the temple, but it doesn't make you in any way ethically unfit, morally unfit. Everything that God reiterates in the prophets on the reason he sends you into exile, that you kept all the spiritual aspects, all the legal aspects, but you overlooked the ethical ones, mistreating the widow, the orphan, the stranger. This is ultimately what God looks for us to find favor in us. However, there's a procedure. If someone wants to go into the temple, they have to immerse and they have to make themselves fit. That doesn't mean that God dislikes us, just, because we're not able to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, there are commands that say, like, you shall cleanse yourself. Like a man, like you mentioned, a man having a nocturnal emission, like a Baal Kadi. Like God says, if a man has an emission, like, he shall immerse.
Yeah, no, for sure you should do it, right? But there is no temple. So most people, Carrie, but Takanis Ezra was one that didn't stick. Takanis Ezra was that in order to study Torah or like to read the Torah, like, you had to immerse yourself. I mean, every time, even I believe after having relations.
Right.
You do it every time after having relations?
No, it didn't. It's not brought down as a halacha. Takanas Ezra was a takana brought down by Ezra. It's not in the Torah.
Does Sabbat do that?
Saying that you can't study Torah unless you are in a state of ritual period.
No, I mean like male, female knowing each other.
You know, I mean, there are guys who go to the mikvah. I don't know why, right? And they all
every day.
Yeah, I mean, Chabad goes every day, but their mikvahs aren't. But they believe that a guy could go to a swimming pool and it counts, for a mikvah. Which all that means is that according to halakha, you don't have to go to the mikvah, because if you had to go to a mikvah, like it would have to be a woman's mikvah. Like that level of 40 saw, like, and the requirements of like an actual.
Quick question. I'm sorry. Quick question. So if a woman has to go to a mikveh at once a month for nidah, why doesn't a man have to do the same thing?
Hold on. All right, Chief, go ahead. The Chief wanted to say something.
Yeah, this dude's just been going on and on. Like, my question is that I'm just a scientist, and I noticed that science didn't make it to your list up there. And I'm wondering if you would recommend Judaism as a replacement for science.
Yeah. There are many Jews, religious Jews, who are scientists, just like there's many religious Christians who are scientists. I mean, Sir Isaac Newton was extremely religious and also a scientist. I would say the father of the theory of evolution was a scientist and also believed in God. For some reason, people claim evolution as some sort of godless pursuit. So it's not they're not necessarily two ideas that cannot exist together.
So do you think that those gentlemen actually believed in God, or do you think that they said that publicly to avoid public persecution?
I think Isaac Newton wrote a lot of books on Christianity.
In secret, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of well, not in secret. I mean, at the time of Isaac Newton, Christians weren't being persecuted. In terms of Charles Darwin, I wouldn't say that his understanding of God was the Jewish or biblical understanding. Einstein also believed in God. I also wouldn't say that it's a Torah understanding of God, but it wasn't this pessimistic, agnostic position that we see nowadays, like being pushed by atheists.
Are you suggesting that they worshiped the Jewish God? Because we're talking about Judaism here, right?
No, like I just said that it probably wasn't the same God of the Bible, but they didn't deny the existence of God, which is what we see amongst pessimistic agnostics.
Right, but my question was, would you recommend Judaism as a replacement for science?
I don't think science contradicts Judaism. But the foundation of Judaism are not the stories. Hold on.
I have a friend writing a book on how Judaism and physics actually collide. They make sense together. I have a friend actually writing that book.
No, not just that. Dr. Gerald Schroeder.
I have a friend writing a book about vampires.
Okay, all right. But an MIT professor, former MIT professor called Gerald Schroeder, like he taught in my yeshiva, he wrote a book called Genesis and the Big Bang. There are many, many highly educated, scientists who believe in God. With the idea that if you're a scientist, you have to be an atheist, I just don't see it. I mean, how do you explain dark matter? I mean, how do you explain a lot of things? There are things currently that are unexplainable. They may be explained in the future, but the idea that atheism has the answer to everything, or no.
Well, the idea that unexplainable things explain the existence of God is equally ludicrous.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that. But it seems that atheists, from this perspective, are more religious than even-keeled religious people who say, like, perhaps I can't prove that God exists, although you can't prove he doesn't exist either. We both have evidence on both sides. However, what we could prove is how great people believe or how great people behave when they have the presence of a good God in their lives. Meaning, they read books that push the ideas of a good God who wants humanity to behave better than animals do. Right? Religious people donate more time. They volunteer. They volunteer more time. They donate more money. I don't know why.
But donate money to what? You know what I mean? Because are they donating money that ends up purchasing weapons or something like that? Or are they donating money that's actually going to feed children who are hungry?
I would say that per capita, philanthropy in America is controlled by Jews. and not atheistical Jews who perhaps don't call themselves religious.
Yeah.
I mean,
But my question was, does the majority of philanthropy that comes from the, let's call it the religion of Abraham, that being, or Ziontology, whatever, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all together. Let's take all three together, right? Let's take all the philanthropy that all three sects of the cult of David, or Abraham, right? It's all the God of Abraham, all the same God of Abraham, right? Take all that philanthropy and let's look at that philanthropy for a minute. How does that philanthropy break down?
Well, with institutions like Yale and Harvard that were created in order basically to spread ethics and morality via religion, I think that you're reaping the benefits from it today. And if you're not able to see that, that makes you a social ingrate. Now,
Harvard just got busted for plagiarism. Harvard is not really a very good representative of higher learning anymore. As a matter of fact, I would
at its inception, like all these major Ivy League colleges
is basically worth the rolling paper. You might as well roll up and smoke something with it. It's not worth what it used to be.
But you acknowledge what it used to be. And all these higher institutions, the initial ones, were created in order to instill biblical values in society. Right? It's essentially...
And that's exactly what devalued Harvard as a learning institution. You realize that, right?
No, what devalued it was Harvard becoming left, and left as atheistical pursuits is what hurt Harvard, not religious ones. I mean, the left destroys everything it touches, and the left is typically packed with atheists and people who claim to be scientists.
I was actually shocked to learn that Harvard was so influenced by, like you said, the Christianity. Because
society
I thought that
you
it
live
was
in,
an independent institution of higher learning with unbiased opinion and open discussion, and that they sought things like intellectualism and open debate and discussion, and that's not actually what Harvard is about. It turns out.
Hold on, there's an echo in the background. Yeah, I mean, I think that you don't have to claim to be religious to be able to pay tribute to the ethics that brought us to where we are today, right? I mean, if you acknowledge that what makes the West superior to, let's say, oh my God, the echo, like all these other individuals who like wish us death, like every day, is that the echo. Anyways, fine. Anyways, let's go next topic.
Oh yeah. Well, I was just going to suggest that maybe, instead of building this new temple, why don't we build like a free hospital or some community gardens instead? What do you think about that?
Who's gathering money to build a temple?
Judaism.
I don't.
Ziontology.
I don't think many Jews. Most Zionists wouldn't care less, like if there was a second or a third temple ever built. Most Jews are not religious. The state of Israel is a secular country, and I would say that Jews are doing just that. Jews are building hospitals. I don't know what I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I can tell you there's a lot of Christians who are very excited about the third temple being built and Jesus coming back.
But this is a Jewish show. It's not a Christian one.
Zionist Christians who are very excited about this new temple project, and they're giving all kinds of money.
No one's giving money
towards this project all the time. And like you said, someone mentioned earlier, but you mentioned a word about someone who's not allowed to go into synagogue. What was it?
No, not synagogue. Once the temple is built, there's a procedure that someone has to go to become ritually impure, i.e. so they can enter the temple to offer sacrifices. That has nothing to do with someone being stopped from coming closer to God. You could commune with God wherever you happen to be. The atheistical idea, and they've been ridiculing, let's say, Christians in South America for pouring tons of money into building these beautiful cathedrals. When an atheist will always say, wouldn't that money be better spent on the pure, like on the poor? And in places like Peru, and like places where communists were able to take over, like certain segments, let's say of Peru, and they tore down these cathedrals, they took down the gold and they melted it down and gave it to the poor people. And after 1 year, all that gold was lost, right? You still had poor among you, but they no longer had a beautiful cathedral to call their own. This idea, this essentially Marxist idea that religion is just there to corrupt, it's essentially nonsense.
Well, what would converting to Judaism do for me?
I think it would make you a lot happier just by making you more grateful, acknowledging that we didn't make it this far on our own. We're standing ethically and morally on the shoulders of giants. The reason that you could claim to be an ethical humanist or like an ethical scientist is because your great-grandparents were most likely religious. And this idea of cut flower ethics is going to catch up with you. That you think that you can be ethical on the back of your religious heritage, but your philosophy is ultimately, like just like it happened in the Soviet Union, is going to end up destroying you. Now,
okay,
I'm on the side of humans. I mean, I wish that we could be ethical without God. I truly want, humans to be able to make it ethically. But the trend we see in history is them failing over and over again when they try to reinvent the wheel ethically. So because I care about humanity, I would prefer a society that's instilled with biblical values than one that creates Mao's red book and in some way believes that they're a piece of cosmic garbage and everything has no meaning, right? There are atheistical Jews who put their kids in religious schools because they understand that the existence of religion in people's lives is a net gain. But it sounds like you believe that it's a net loss.
Okay, well, you mentioned like the little guy earlier, and I was wondering, like, who are you actually referring to when you mentioned the little guy?
Arabs in Israel.
Arabs and Israel?
No, Arabs who live in Israel proper.
Okay. See, I would refer to the little guy. I think the real little guy in this situation is children. I think children are the real little guys that we need to be looking out for. When I look at this whole situation, I see a bunch of very irresponsible adults who are not really ready to take accountability for their actions. And I see a bunch of hurt children all around them. And what I'm asking as a scientist is for you guys to just consider the children to be the little guys and for you guys to figure it out yourselves as adults, but leave the little guys out of it.
So it's interesting. With the same group that identifies with science are the ones who are for booster shots, for 2-year-olds, mask wearing, for 5-year-olds, right? This idea that science always has our best.
Either of those things happen to my child than circumcision.
You would rather your child receive the vaccine than get circumcised?
Frankly, yeah.
Okay. So it shows.
Well, I'd rather them have neither. I mean, frankly, I'd rather do the neither. Regular vaccines are fun. There's some vaccines that I'm comfortable with, but not necessarily all of them all at once, if you know what I'm saying.
All right, so being a scientist doesn't mean that you have humanity's interest.
I'm much more comfortable vaccinating my child than allowing them to become circumcised, yes.
So injecting your kid with a chemical, you think it's less harmful than an actual surgery?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where we're going to disagree. That we don't even know the consequences for this vaccine, although there are many healthy kids who died because of it. Compare that to the kids who died during circumcision. Does it even compare? I don't. You said that being a scientist.
Thing, I wouldn't give my kid the new COVID vaccine anyway. I'm not vaccinated when it comes to COVID-19, and I wouldn't vaccinate my kid either, and I wouldn't circumcise them either. I wouldn't do either of those terrible things to a child.
So which one's worse in your mind?
Frankly, on its face, I'd say that the circumcision is much observably worse.
So that shows your bias. Okay, this idea that we ultimately don't care what we inject children with, but a surgery that removes some skin, like off his member, that's worse. It shows that you have a chip on your shoulder.
The medical necessity, just based on medical necessity alone, I'd say there's more evidence for medical necessity for vaccination in some cases for some children maybe than there is for, the amount of medical necessity for circumcision is just so incredibly low. It just does not compare to the medical necessity of vaccination for some kids. I do believe that some kids might actually benefit.
You're talking about medical necessity here.
but
We're talking about harming children. I mean, from a religious perspective, it's a necessity to circumcise your child. From a secular perspective, right? Anything they deem, to be obligatory, right? They will legislate it. That's a tyrannical, left-wing, atheistical mind, not the religious one. I would say that more religious people probably agree with you regarding the vaccine for COVID, because it sounds like you're not a big fan of it either, than people who claim to be scientists and on the left. Right? And I could almost guarantee that if you're an atheist, you're a leftist. I would say leftism is the religion of atheism.
Okay, well, there's also a lot of PhDs who happen to be vaccine skeptics as well.
Absolutely. And those PhDs
they make up another large portion of the vaccine skeptic community. I'm not a PhD, but I stand with the PhDs who are skeptical of the current narrative.
Okay. So the American Health Association, the CDC, right, the WHO, are pro not just the vaccine but the boosters, and they're typically not peddling a religious agenda or narrative at all. Right? I mean, Fauci doesn't claim to be religious either. So
what does the CDC say? Or I guess the CDC wouldn't do it, but what does the WHO say about circumcision?
I think it's a neutral point in terms of like.
There you go.
Yeah. What does it have to do with medicine? I mean, absolutely. The majority of the harm that's done on this planet, it's done trying to do good for people. I mean, not people actively trying to do bad. So
I would highly disagree. I would observe. I think on its face, the people who are trying to harm other people are causing and observably trying very hard to harm other people, going way out of their way to harm other people, are causing orders of magnitude more problems for everything else on Earth, not just humans, but themselves. As a matter of fact, they're causing more problems for themselves than any of the people who are just trying to live their lives.
So you think on this planet there are people who are actively targeting people to harm them, or are people just pursuing utopian ideas?
Observably.
All right. I mean, I completely disagree. I mean, the Soviet Union thought they were doing humanity a favor by burning down churches and getting rid of God, right?
Why do militaries take up so much of our budget?
Because the way you defeat bad ideas is with enforced good ideas.
I don't think that the military is a good way to solve problems or come up with good ideas.
Even when it's reactionary?
Especially when it's reactionary.
So that absolutely makes no sense. So Hitler, they should have been allowed to take control of all of Europe. South Korea.
No, what should have happened is all of those people should have ignored Hitler because he's an observable crazy man.
Yeah, but he had a military that was more
powerful. What should have happened is we should have had science intervene. As you notice, that the Catholic Church was very happy and friendly with Hitler. As a matter of fact, there was plenty of rabbis who were very cozy and friendly with Hitler. You guys were had no problem with Hitler when he was around. Yeah, until he lost the war. Then what a bad guy. Yeah,
so the Catholics
that was y'all's guy. So I think that science, if all of those Nazis would have just paid more attention to science and done more social science, we would have had better solutions to our problems. And if they had better education and better awareness of their surroundings, then they never would have been fooled into such a crazy organization.
Unfortunately, a lot of medical necessity, a lot of the surgeries, a lot of the medical advancements came from the Nazis.
No, yeah, but okay. Germany and what happened during World War II, that wasn't a religious pursuit. It was a secular one. This idea that Hitler was in some way cozy with the Pope, it is not true. I mean, the Pope was hiding.
We would have come to those conclusions eventually without torturing humans or hurting anyone. You know what I mean? We could have, without harming anyone, we could have come to those conclusions perfectly, ethically, and morally, without any God either, without the need for any God.
I don't understand.
And I'll remind you that I pointed out earlier that the true little ones in this situation are the children, and I came to that conclusion without any God. There was no God that helped me come to that conclusion.
But what you think is helping the children is actually hurting them. I just saw you, the vast majority of people who claim to be scientists like you want to vaccinate.
What is actually hurting those children?
What is actually hurting them?
Yeah.
So I mentioned the vaccine. I mean, typically pushed by people who are irreligious. Drag queen story hour, and virtually every
Gender
left
affirming care.
right, gender affirming care, all these left wing irreligious ideas, right, that are actively hurting children. And the only thing you mentioned regarding religious people is circumcision. It seems that we live on the same planet, but we inhabit different universes.
Okay, so when I mentioned things that are hurting children, you mentioned drag queens, and what else was it? The vaccine and drag queens?
No, I mentioned gender affirming care. I mentioned, we could throw in more books. The indoctrination of children on the public school level by giving them all these books that they really shouldn't be reading.
Right.
Desensitizing children. These aren't ideas that are coming from religious communities. They're coming from atheistical ones.
So when I point to children being harmed, like this is just an example of the dichotomy of someone who believes in a God and someone who trusts in science, right? Mm-hmm. So when I think of children being harmed, I think about children being 86'd by weapons. I think of children being starved to the point of being 86'd. Those are the kind of things that I think about, right? So that's just a perfect example of the kind of dichotomy between someone who believes in God. You think the real threat to children is a man dressed in a dress reading to them and a vaccine that's supposed to protect them.
You even said that reactionary.
These are the things that you consider threats to children. Like,
hold on.
This is a perfect example of the dichotomy of the morality of people who believe in nonsense and people who believe in science. People who believe in science, we're the ones who protect and save your children.
But you just
people
said
like you who are peddling nonsense to people and peddling schizophrenia are in no way protecting children. As a matter of fact, you're observably harming children. And all I'm asking is for you guys to stop.
Okay.
And I'm sure by the little guy, he's not even accounting like
hold on.
Sorry.
Or children abortion.
Hold on. You said even a military reacting to them being attacked is something you would be against. So I guess you would be this notion that you save children by allowing the bad people to do whatever they want, not just to the children but to their parents, seems completely absurd. The idea that because you're for science, you're against religion is also silly. You could be for science and be for, endorsing ethical religious values. Like, I don't know. I know where the confusion comes in. It's because you want to fail to acknowledge where the values that made Western society livable actually come from. And that's the Bible. And I'm not telling you to believe in God, but you can't even acknowledge that. And that's the only thing we're promoting here. I'm not promoting Christianity. I don't believe in Jesus. I'm promoting people being sensitized with biblical values. So this idea that you're prolonging the life of children, right, and religious people are not, I don't think you made the case for that.
I can make it again.
No. I mean, not if you're just going to reiterate like your same anti-war position.
I can make another case. I mean, that's just one. That's just one that I pulled from. We can look at
you haven't answered the question
of eunuchs.
What do you do? Wait, hold on. You haven't answered the challenge that I made. That are you still against armies fighting in a reactionary manner? Yes or no?
Yes, I am against armies taking any violent action to solve any problem. I think it's a failure of problem solving anytime that anyone uses any kind of violence to solve a problem. It's not like, I guess then it's another person, I mean, we can always
Israel gets invaded by Hamas, and Israel should just let them continue to kill them.
Yeah, it's a failure of dialogue. It's a failure of organization. And I think
no, but tell me, what should Israel have done?
That problem is that if somebody attacks you like that, the way that you respond is you get together with the other people who aren't violent assholes, and you team up with them to find non-violent ways to secure and subdue that violent entity and
without violence,
strip it of its energy and stop feeding it and essentially isolate it until it dies like a cancer cell.
But then you live in some utopian paradise that it makes absolutely no sense. I'm sorry. I don't even know, we can continue the conversation. You're saying that if Hamas or any Islamic group, right, because they have this vision of a global caliphate, happens to invade your borders, unalive your people, you should just put your weapons down and let them finish what they want to do? I mean, have you prayed for them?
Yes, exactly. The first thing that I would do is stop giving them money.
Okay. All right.
He's trolling.
Yeah, it sounds like a troll because there's no actual solution there.
Well, stop giving them money. You don't think that stopping giving them money is like one really good way to start? Is just stop feeding them?
With this idea that we fund all terrorists And if we just in some way, giving them money, anyone who donates money to the Palestinian people is giving the PA and Hamas money. So, I don't understand what you're talking about. Stop giving them money. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. People who invade you aren't always funded by you. I don't understand this.
Well, here, I'm going to give you a perfect example. Instead of giving anyone money, just get food and diapers and medicine and clothing and send those things instead, right? So you're not sending money, which can be turned into anything. You're sending resources
so Poland
and
was
assets
giving,
that can actually be used.
So Poland
Bada
was
bing,
giving.
Problem solved. There's your solution to your problem. I didn't take any God for me to do it either.
Okay. So Poland was giving Germany money when Germany invaded them during World War II, right? I mean, was Ukraine giving Russia money when Russia invaded? I don't understand your thinking. Was China, giving the Chinese communists who were educated in the Soviet Union money when they began to? It's so silly. It's just.
What I'm suggesting is that instead of giving food and resources and cold hard cash to violent, crazy adults, let's give the food and the money and the cold hard cash and the resources to the youngest humans on the planet and just trust them to make better decisions.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense. So if somebody breaks into your house,
take care of the women and the children first. Actually, yes.
Yeah, like you said, younger people make better decisions than older people. So,
yes, observably and repeatedly, yes.
Thank God that the Democrats
yeah,
didn't get their way.
That's a group known for its decision-making abilities, the youth.
No, the Democrats wanted to give
Clearly,
16-year-olds the vote.
Observably and repeatedly, yes. I'll say it again.
Okay. All right, so if somebody breaks into your house, right, with a weapon, would you fight back in any way?
Yes.
So why are you against countries fighting back?
Because countries are breaking into people's houses.
No, if that country's being invaded from a reactionary perspective, why are you against them fighting the invader off, but you're allowed to fight your invader off?
Because a country and a house are two very different things. I'm very comfortable with the boundaries of a house. I'm not comfortable with the boundaries of countries. I have no respect for countries. I have respect for houses. That's why.
All right.
It's not hard.
So what does this all have to do with Judaism, I have to wonder? Because it seems like Chief has just been really railing against their own religious trauma and not really pushing the conversation forward.
Yeah, he's trolling.
You're free. I'm not restricting anyone's speech.
It's good. I think the conversation has to be had.
Speech. You're free to talk about whatever you want. I encourage you to talk about whatever you want. It's Israel who is restricting what people are allowed to say.
You're taking time and space from the rest of us, and you're setting the tone to be very combative.
No, I think the conversation.
I'm just saying that Judaism is the one who's trying to restrict what other people are saying, not
Judaism.
Not me.
Okay, the Zionist entity in the state of Israel doesn't speak for Judaism, and the idea that it's religious people in some way stopping what you can say by the simple fact that we have to use words like unalive and Yahtzee, it's not because of religious people; it's because of the left. You give a handful of people a little bit of power and they become tyrannical. That's not something that we typically see in religious communities, at least not Jewish and Christian ones, but in left-wing communities that they identify with science over biblical ethics.
How hard is that? What is it going to hurt you to just identify as scientist and just instead of building temples and churches, build a free hospital and some community gardens? What's that going to hurt?
I would say
that's only going to make your life better.
Why are these things mutually exclusive?
Correct. More free hospitals have been built in the name of religion that have ever been built in the name of secularism, by the way. Okay.
Right. So let's just do more in the name of secularism is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but secularism.
So if you want to do more in the name of secularism, why aren't you going out there being secular in the world and doing things? Why are you here on TikTok arguing with us?
I don't know. Why don't you check my TikTok and see what I'm out there doing in the world? I build community gardens. I build hospitals. That's what I do.
Do it also.
So what are you doing here on TikTok what are you doing here on TikTok if this is what you want to do?
I'm defending children on TikTok. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, no one's attacking children. That's the thing. But we just believe.
You think anyone's attacking children, my dude? I can provide examples.
On this channel.
The great thing about talking for and speaking up and defending children is that they have no prior experience to know whether or not you're actually doing a good job of it. So
yep, that's why it's up to me. And I also have a louder voice than they do. I'm also better at words than they are. That's why I'm doing it for them.
So you're saying that you know better than children, you know what's better for children than children do?
No, I'm saying that I'm louder than those children are. I have more access to a platform than those children have. So
I think I know what's
a
better
voice
for
for
children
them.
than what children, think they know is better for themselves. But I think this just shows that being irreligious and specifically against religion, right, makes you like, you don't come around philosophically. It makes absolutely no sense. Like, you're saying that one is allowed to protect their house and their boundaries violently, like if they have to, but they can't do so in defense of their country, and that religious people actually harm children more than secular people. And by the way, I don't even consider you completely secular, because I'm pretty sure your values don't come from Marx and don't come from observable science. But
they come from science. My values come from science, and they also come from the fact that I'm an earthling.
Your values are maybe supported by science, but they don't come from science.
I think it comes from the fact that you're a descendant of religious people, and you were raised in a religious society, entrenched in biblical values, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. I don't think science in any way contradicts my religion.
Okay, the earth revolving around the sun is not a biblical value, my dude. That is a scientific value.
That's not a value. That
science is not a religion in itself. Like, what do you? Keep on saying that the opposite of religion is science.
Chief, what are you here to do? Are you here to actually try to talk us out of religion, or are you trying to feed your own ego?
I'm here to convert people from the cult of Ziontology to science and defend children while I'm doing it. Speak for children while I'm at it.
Not all Jews are Zionists.
Makes you sound like a giant a-hole.
I don't.
I did have some halakhic questions.
Sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to do that, but he was really getting on my nerves.
I think the conversation needs to be had, because there aren't enough religious people responding to atheistical claims, right? And it just seems irrational. It just seems completely irrational. I'm pretty sure that you can be ethical and an atheist, 100%. Okay, and you could be a crappy person and religious, but to say that science or scientific theory or what scientists happen to believe are always going to have the best interests of children in mind is completely nonsensical. Especially nowadays with vaccines and
abortion rate.
Right, abortion. Gender affirming care. People.
As someone who does receive gender affirming care, I can tell you that it is actually in the best interest of children.
Okay, yeah. So that's where we'll disagree. That's where we disagree. But yeah. Anyways, next.
So can we talk Holocaust?
Wait.
I was really hoping that we could talk about the exact nature of what it is that me as a Gentile is supposed to have coming into Judaism. What is, other than becoming a member of the House of Israel, what's expected of me? Because I'm a Norse pagan. I'm not of Christianity or of Islam or any of the other big ones. What's my responsibility? How do I learn? What am I supposed to learn? And I'll shut down and shut up and stop talking from here on.
No problem. So your responsibility is to enter Israel. With this idea that a Gentile could in some way remain a Gentile and be fully validated by God, that only exists from a midrashic level, meaning regarding folklore and legend. And if someone's approaching me, asking me, how can I please God in the most secure way possible, I could only reiterate what the Torah says. The Torah makes no distinction between Jews and Gentiles. The Torah separates the world between those in a covenant with God and those not in a covenant with God. I understand Rabbinic Judaism has this notion of the 7 laws of Noah, which only means that if you were a Gentile who wanted to either live in or traverse through the land of Israel, you'd be expected to keep 7 laws, right? Because we're not going to adjudicate someone who hasn't accepted the totality of Jewish law, like we would, like an Orthodox Jew or whatever. So we make a distinction between Gentile and Jew from that perspective, but that doesn't mean that God makes a distinction. In order to please God, you have to keep his commandments. In order to properly keep God's commandments, you have to enter Israel. So that's pretty much it. Study what Jews study and enter a process of conversion.
So that's really, so for me as a non-Jew, that's basically the path for me would be to become an Israelite, or it would be to become Jewish.
That's the most responsible religious path. There are other paths. I mean, you could remain a Noahide, let's say, keep the 7 laws of Noah. However, that doesn't have its roots in the Torah. So I have to strive to be responsible with God and what the Torah tells me. And it seems like that's the only advice God has for humanity. Keep my commandments and you will be blessed. That's it.
So my question for you then is, there's one concept that I cannot give up. And if I were to go into the house of Israel, could I keep it? And that is animism.
What is that?
Animism is this idea that everything, and I mean everything, the rocks, the trees, the wind, the sun, the moon, everything has an anima. Everything has a base essence to it that we all have to respect, understand, and live with. And whether that's imbued by creation of God or by creation of other, however things were created, that base anima is the thing that we have to be in good relationship with at all times.
That's fine. I mean, that's not a disqualifying factor.
So that's not a disqualifying factor. Just want to make sure.
I mean, there are Jews who
I got to go get lunch. It's lunchtime for me.
Okay.
So have a blessed day.
Okay, you too.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah.
What's good?
Hi. So this Anna, I'm not sure what she said, but it sounds a lot like pantheism or panentheism, some would say, which is slightly different. Which there are Jews who are excommunicated for, but I would say the vast majority of Hasidic Jews adopt some form of it, that God is everything. I remember there was this guy in the old city, his name is Gutman Locks. And he wrote a whole book called God is One or something like that, but he sort of teaches that God is everything, that God is this. It's almost a Kabbalistic idea that there's an essence of God in everything around you. So God is in somewhat fragmented. Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated from a Spanish-Portuguese community because they were extremely rational. I mean, the Spanish-Portuguese were like the masters of the Rambam, like for a long time. But I don't think he would have been excommunicated today. Anyways, what's up, Rob?
What's good? I just wanted to talk about Judaism.
Oh, all right, sure.
I was just wondering, why do you think I should consider it? Like,
what religion do you belong to now?
I'm a Christian.
Are you a religious Christian?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not here to pull you away from Christianity, but I would encourage you to become Torah observant.
All right.
Like mainly because it's to my best interest and the interest of my children that you are sensitized with Torah values. I don't care like if you believe that you're saved by believing in Jesus or you're saved from heaven by believing in Jesus. You save us on earth, all of us, by trying to keep God's laws.
Okay, so you're talking more like I could even be like a Messianic Jew.
Correct.
Okay. I thought you were talking from like a theological aspect. No, I would agree, obviously, by like even as a Christian, Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commands. So obviously I do agree with that. So
now, I would rather you become an Orthodox Jew and not believe in Jesus, but I don't think that just believing in Jesus, assuming that you keep Torah law and you identify as Israel, I don't think it's a disqualifying factor.
Okay, that's an interesting one. And what stops you from becoming a Messianic Jew?
Because I believe the idea of the Messiah is a later developed idea, especially how it's taught today. Also, the notion of heaven and hell are later developed ideas. I believe in an afterlife, and I believe in reward and punishment, but I don't believe it's doctrinal. I don't think God mentions it or wants us to do the right thing because of it. Yeah, I just think that less is more from that perspective.
And what about the triune aspect of Christianity, about God being triune?
Jews have this idea of there being 10 emanations of God that I also think is foolish. I think it's foolish. I don't think it's heretical or idolatrous. I just think it's silly.
The Trinity.
Yeah. No, I can think that an idea is silly and not heretical. Means that we could still be brothers, but we could still, keep Torah together and identify as Israel. And you think that God has 10 pieces to him or 10 understandings, and someone else could think it's 10 or 3. It doesn't change how you keep one law in the Torah.
Right. And how would you say that then you're going to be able to join God in his presence in the afterlife? Like how do you guys do it?
Oh, see, the Torah doesn't talk about an afterlife. So my job is to keep laws on this planet, like for God to bless me on this planet. I wish there's an afterlife. This notion that if there's an afterlife, man's still going to be there with the capability of sinning, right? Because I think you're trying to push the idea that a sinful man cannot stand before the presence of God. Like we sure know that Moses did, and Moses was sinful. So I don't. That's more That's more mystical than I claim to be.
Oh, okay. I get what you're trying to say. Yeah. But we do know there's a heaven, right?
Well, I think the earth is renewed, right? The earth is renewed, and then the Tanakh talks about the resurrection, thanks to that notion.
Yeah, but the Torah doesn't. That's the thing.
The meek inherit the earth. That would be my structure or my take on it.
Yeah, so the Torah doesn't say any of that stuff. The Torah itself, Tanakh and the book of Daniel may embellish certain ideas of redemption to an unhealthy level, in my opinion. But the Torah doesn't talk about heaven. Shemaim just means the sky. It doesn't mean a place where people hang on. I wish there's a heaven, by the way. I wish there's a resurrection. I wish reincarnation is true. But I'm not going to say the Bible teaches and utter any of those concepts.
Well, resurrection is mentioned 3 or 4 times in Tanakh.
In the Torah, Torah. And resurrection, I think it's only Daniel chapter 12. Ezekiel 35 or 37 doesn't talk about a resurrection. It talks about a reincarnation from that perspective. It's Ezekiel prophesying over Israel, i.e., bones who are dead, people who are not keeping Torah are considered dead, and they're brought back to life once they accept the Torah. I think it's a later developed idea.
And are you Torah only?
No, I believe in the oral law also, but the oral law contains what we call halakha, what you do, not what you believe.
Talking about the Talmud and the Mishnah.
Yeah. And I believe in the prophets as books that were sanctioned by the judges to amplify the Torah. They're there to give you an understanding of Jewish history on how God acted and reacted, to just bring you closer to Torah observance. Yeah.
And what would you say Isaiah and stuff was speaking about? Obviously they were talking about someone that will come and do this, that, and the third. So I'm just wondering, what is your take on that? Do you believe that is a Messiah, but it's not necessary?
No, it depends what chapter you're talking about. I would say Isaiah 53 is talking about it, Isaiah himself, and all future messengers who are caused to suffer. If you believe Jesus was a messenger, it wouldn't exclude him. The idea that a prophet could in some way deviate from the message in the Torah, which is only Torah observance. It says in Deuteronomy 18 that if the prophet doesn't basically reiterate the Torah message, that's the only thing we could validate, because every prophet will say I'm preaching in behalf of God, even though it sounds new and different. It says in Deuteronomy 12 and 13 that if he tells you anything new and different, you take him out and stone him. So a prophet can't add anything new. He could only point you back to what's old.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
The goal is not to change the will of God. God says twice in the Torah, don't add or take away from essentially what I expect from you. Now, since then, you have Kabbalistic Judaism, you have Christianity, you have Islam, all saying that God is giving us further revelation. There's something more. And I have no issue in people believing in further revelation as long as they don't speak in behalf of the Torah and start pushing people away from their community just because they happen to disagree. If someone wants to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, good luck. Okay. I'd rather that person adopt a Torah observance. And, there are Jews who walk around today who believe that their teacher is the Messiah. But it doesn't change the way they keep laws. They could still commune with other Jews. So why make that huge distinction between us and them if it's a Torah that unites us?
point.
Hey, Rabbi, can I get back to the question I was asking you earlier
Yeah, good.
about the pure and impure?
Yeah, sure.
So, like, just saying you work in obviously work in a purely secular world. You go out to work, and let's say you work with women, and a woman is in her cycle, and they die, and they're like, you sit on the same chair, like when you go home. I mean, how do you treat those kind of situations if you just don't know?
Yeah, no. I mean, you're impure.
You immerse, when you
We're
home.
all impure. There's no running away from it. Everybody's impure nowadays. Now, there's a distinction between the impurity imparted by touching a nidah and and having sex with a nidah.
Right.
So having sex with a nidah is what's called an isser, like you're out of the Jewish people. That's what it's. I mean, to be cut off. But yes, in terms of entering the temple, no one is allowed to enter the temple today till we have a red heifer that they burn. They take the ashes, put them in water, and then you immerse. So, welcome to the impurity club.
Yeah, but there seems to be like a distinction, an idea of saying like, okay, well, there's since there's no temple, there's no. It's not necessarily like I think the Rambam says it's not really a mitzvah to seek purity if you're not going to seek total purity.
Right. Yeah.
Versus, okay, well, I may be unclean because I may have known someone who touched a corpse and they may have touched me, but then there's still the idea of like the impurity that you can handle, which is like, again, if you sit after someone in a nidah or you have sex or something, you go and immerse after that. But then there's like knowing that you go to work with women who you could be sitting after, for instance, like, do you just like take that into account in your daily ritual and then, cleanse yourself like every day? Or
what is he asking about, like a sitting after? Does he understand the reason why it was like that mentioned in the Torah like that?
Well, no, I mean, unless you're talking about like, people not wearing underwear and stuff like that.
Yeah, it doesn't spread like that.
Yeah, there was no.
By the way, I mean,
that's why I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I just wanted to say, like, that's why the derogatory term came from, a woman on the rag, because they didn't have like feminine hygiene products back then. So quite literally, a rag would be that use. And if she's wearing a dress or she's wearing a cloak or something, there is a chance that it could transfer to something, whereas it's less likely of a chance to just say it.
Right, but I'm saying, like, does that necessarily, when you read it, okay, I understand, like, you come from a rabbinical approach or even a rational approach, but if we go by, as Torah states, then, it seems to say straightforward, anything she sits on is unclean.
I think you're making a
But I'm really not trying to.
It's not unclean.
Yeah, I mean, it would be unclean just because of the fact that if you would go to the temple, okay, let's run this through. Okay, so you have a husband.
Before you continue,
and she's nidah.
I'm sorry.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Before you continue, I'm sorry.
I'm on TikTok and you're on YouTube, and so I can't hear. There's a delay, so I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, no. I'm saying that I'm really like I appreciate that, but the point I'm trying to make is not really about the details about a woman and her nidah. I'm trying to understand.
Sir, there's no practical application today. We are all perpetually unclean from the Torah.
Again, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, how do you treat it in your daily life?
No, you can do
it.
I
understand what the purpose of it is.
Hey, listen. You can do it if you want. But the Talmud talks about Pharisees. I mean, there's a handful of sections that talks about Pharisees. And and Prushim. Like, one complaint on them is that they kept standards of ritual purity when they didn't have to. That means even like in the rabbinical world, it was viewed as going above and beyond. Like, if you want to do that and put your spouse through that, then I mean, go ahead. The only reason women go to a mikvah nowadays is because of there's karet, there's actual excision for having sex with a nidah. It has nothing to do with the temple. I mean, the temple, you could do it. No one's stopping you. I mean, the Bavards go to the mikvah every day, and some I even heard, I mean, do it, for kiri. I mean, some do it for Takanas Ezra. I mean, there are people who keep fast nowadays that are like no longer applicable. You know, I mean, there's optional fasts. There's a handful of optional fasts, you know, from the fast of Esther to the, you know, Tzom Gedalia, all these optional fasts that people do. You can do it if you want, right? But you don't have to.
And then you're saying that
Like
saying it's not obligatory because
do this or want to hold this for nocturnal emission. Does he wash and be unclean until evening after a nocturnal emission? So let's say he wakes up in the morning, nocturnal emission, he washes, and then he is still technically unclean all that day until evening.
Are you asking me, or are you bringing a just
She's reading what the Torah says.
No, I'm not reading. That's from memory. I'm asking him, like if he's wanting a practical application, you can do so, but you're going to have to be extremely stringent upon yourself. I mean, I'm not really sure what you're trying to ask other than what do you do in light of the Torah? The Torah is very explicit about these things, yes, but it's in light of other qualifiers like a temple and, you know, communal practice together. And you just don't have that when you're spread out. And so we're all just perpetually unclean until the time of the Mashiach.
Right. Okay, so maybe let me just try saying it one more way.
Wait, hold on.
I think you're getting to the source of my, or you're getting to answer the source of my question. Is I'm saying, like, yes, I understand we're all perpetually unclean, you know, for various reasons outside of just, you know, woman being her nidah, or, you know, guy nocturnal emissions, or just having sex. But I'm asking, you know, Rabbi, you know, almost personally, when the times where you know you can, like, because in the Torah it specifically says you shall immerse or you shall cleanse yourself. So I'm saying, do you take that as an obligatory, you know, as a command from God, like saying if you can, right, outside of
that's what it means. It's like buying a car when you're blind. You understand? It's like, well, you should have a car, you know, or like paying all your tickets off, you know, but your license is suspended, you know, for a different reason. It doesn't matter how pure you get, you're always going to miss the mark because we don't have the ashes of the red heifer. Right. You're going to remain pure. You know, so you paid off, you know, 2 of your tickets, but you have 1,000 left, which you can't pay off, you know, for some whatever reason, because we can't, you know, well, I guess we could, like, I mean, find a brown or red cow and make the ashes, you know, but there's no temple. You know, so what are you entering?
Right.
You know, so I get it. You could do it. No one's stopping you from doing it. So I think your question is, why aren't people doing it?
Oh, no, my question really is do you consider it obligatory? But I understand.
No, it's not obligatory if there's no temple.
No,
it's not. Unclean is not a good translation, like being tamei.
Yeah.
You know, it's just unfit. That means you can't enter this, you can't do that. I mean, you could do it if you want, you know, but you still won't be able to get in. I mean, like, good not. You're not gonna. So I mean, go ahead, do it. I'm not against women wearing tzitziot also and putting on tefillin, you know, but there's.
Doesn't the Talmud though, like, for example, when you read Torah, there's some things that are a wee bit hard to understand, and so you would go to, like, you know, the rabbis that will have like the answer to it, like because you know Karaites are strictly Tanakh, they're strictly Torah, but then you have like the Orthodox who have the Talmud and the Messianic, they give them a better understanding on how to carry things out, right? And so that way you're not lost in translation. Does that make sense?
So Karaites are not only, they believe also in Tanakh. Do you mean that they don't appeal to the Talmud?
Right, that's what I mean. Like they could use it for information, but most of them are just strictly scriptures of Torah, or just Tanakh, I should say. And so, like, Tanakh, right? So we could have better understanding. Like, if you go outside of the Torah and you read the Talmud, you can have a little bit better understanding of how to do things. That's what I want to approach. If like there's hard subjects that I just don't have the answer to, I'd probably go that route.
What's a hard subject that you don't believe that the Bible expounds on, that you must seek after the Talmud or another rabbi to tell you?
Well, no.
I mean, for understanding.
I mean, right, you could just read the text and get what, like, for example, don't boil a baby in its mother's milk, right? I think, like, you know, it would take it one step further to not do the whole dairy and with meat in the window, but you're not going to get that from the Tanakh, right? And so I think, you know, it's just having a better understanding of certain subjects, you know, like when it comes to stoning or comes to judges or a court of law or something to that notion. I think, you know, it could give more emphasis on it. And then that's where I guess discernment comes in, Deuteronomy 13, perhaps. I don't know.
No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to understand the connection to the conversation we were having so that I understand what you mean.
Oh, well, he was talking about, you know, what he was talking about in Torah, rather to like, how do you prepare to do it? And then our rabbi was talking about, you know, how, you know, we don't have the ashes or anything like that, and there's no temple. Sometimes when you're just reading the text in the Torah, you're limited just from reading the Torah, and it might help to go to like other sources. That's just what I was talking about. Like concerning that subject, like, you know, the Talmud or the Mishnah.
All right, so let me add on this before we go too far. All right, so as Orthodox Jews, we believe in an oral law. So oral law doesn't necessarily mean it was given all to Moses orally at Mount Sinai. Even Maimonides writes in Sefer Mitzvot that the root of the oral law is the Sanhedrin. Deuteronomy chapter 17, God creates consensus, right? And also the idea predates it with Jethro and like Deuteronomy chapter 1, that there has to be consensus in order for a nation to move forward. The difference between Islam and Christianity is that it's not tied to a land with borders in agrarian society where God expects you to adjudicate his law. So, for example, like a big question is, how do you establish months? And I know that if you take Tanakh completely, that you could come to that conclusion. But they didn't have Tanakh completely back then. They had Torah. So it seems like God tells them to establish the month. It says, like, you shall sanctify the month. And this is why we have this idea that it's with the spotting of the new moon. This appears nowhere in the Torah, right? The judges, God says, in all areas of dispute, you shall go to the place that he chooses, right? Typically, the understanding is that the Sanhedrin ruled from either in front of the tent of meeting or in this place called the Lishkat HaGazit, which is on the Temple Mount, and they will give you over the instructions. Although these men make mistakes, but for the sake of consensus, God allowed flesh and blood to give over law, right? From an authoritative perspective, even though they make mistakes. And if they ever told you to actually break the Torah, you'd be obligated to disobey them. And so it's not like they have complete power. So that's pretty much it. But we have to acknowledge that these interpretations of Torah law are still man-made and could still have errors within them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's where discernment comes into play. I think, you know, the Deuteronomy 13 test. You're to be a Berean, and you have discernment when you even read rabbis. I think you are, you know, when you read, you know, like the Talmud, you have to have discernment to have a better understanding. My opinion.
Oh, that doesn't apply on a national level.
Yeah, it doesn't. You wouldn't be able to do that. You couldn't just walk up to the Sanhedrin and go, "Hey, I'm using discernment. I'm being a Berean, and I think that you're wrong." Now, granted, you could appeal to like an elder, and an elder could, you know, bring it up to the higher court, etc. So on and so. Same way that we have in America. Like, this is a chain of command. But the idea that each person can interpret how they wish on some great matters is not so. You can like wear different style, like tzitziot, like you don't have to, and this is just kind of like rabbinic, that with the tie-in and everything, but let's just go back in time. Like, you can wear whatever you want. Like, they didn't all match. They didn't all look exactly the same, but you could tell they were Jewish, right? So there was the idea of like individuality within a certain parameter. But when it came to like Shabbos, and unaliving people, how to worship, prayer, etc. All of that had to be mandated, and that's still what is mandated today. That's why Jews look to the Talmud, because that's the mandate. Like, you can have a various different color, like yarmulke. It doesn't say what color it has to be, but you can have a different color yarmulke. That's your individual freedom within the Torah. But when it comes to wearing a yarmulke, you must wear a yarmulke according to halakha. So, like, that's the difference. So
I
it's
disagree
not
with
just
that one
being
there,
a
by the way.
Berean.
I mean, I disagree.
Huh?
I mean, just
Is that Gemara, or is that
no? Yeah, there's no halakha to wear a yarmulke. It's a complete custom. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, I know, but you know, like, it became such. Okay, so let me rephrase. More like a minhag, then that became very authoritative.
It's like
you
the
agree
uniform
or disagree?
today. Yeah, it's like a uniform.
Like a what?
Yeah, no, it's become like the uniform, like of religion.
Yeah.
But anyways, okay, great. Like, on that note, I'm gonna end. I told myself I was gonna end at 12:15. It's already 12:23. But thank you guys for stopping by. Friend Courtney, friend Charlie, and everybody friend each other. And until next time.
Baruch Hashem.
Take it easy.